Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Emily Carmichael, and I'm a new entrant development officer with the Partnerships and Outreach team with the Ministry of Agriculture. The Agri-Service webinars run approximately every 2 weeks, and so these webinars are recorded and then posted on the Agri-Service BC webinar webpage. So make sure that you check out the site, the Agri-Service website, for upcoming webinars and also for past webinars. Today, we're lucky enough to have Chris Bodner with us to speak on pivoting your farm production and marketing plan during COVID-19. Chris is a mixed vegetable farmer at Glen Valley Organic Farm in Abbotsford. Chris is also a consultant for BC Agribusiness Planning Program and has taught the Business of Agriculture course at Kwantlen. Today's webinar is aimed at small scale and medium-sized farm operations and will provide growers with a framework for identifying their risks and making plans for their production and marketing in light of the uncertainty brought on by COVID-19. So before we begin, I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping items so that you could all best participate in today's webinar. In the upper right-hand corner of your computer desktop, there is an attendee interface. The orange button with the arrow allows you to open and close your participation panel. If you have questions, please type them into the question pane of the control panel at any time during the presentation, and I'll monitor them and we'll be answering them throughout the presentation. You'll also notice that there's a handout section of the panel, and there are a number of resources available for you today, including a PDF of Chris's PowerPoint, so that if you have any connectivity issues, that you can try to follow along just with that PDF. And if you have any questions that can't be answered during the presentation or would like to follow up with our staff after the presentation, we encourage you to email us at agriservicebc@gov.bc.ca. And so before we begin, one last thing, I'm just going to do a quick poll and it'll take you, the question, it's a simple question, just asks you which of the following best describes your production operation, and just select the one that fits you best. All right. Looks like we have about 70% crop producer, 10% livestock, 10% food processor. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. And so right now I'm just going to pass it off to Chris, and I'll let him carry on with the webinar.
Okay, good morning. I'm just going to wait so that I can share my screen here. Oh, I'm just Emily.
Yeah.
And it's not showing up
There
for me
we
to be
go.
able to. There we go.
You got it?
Okay, yes, and you
Sorry
can see
about
my
that.
screen.
Just had to close the poll there.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Well, what a crazy time to have to do a webinar, but I think that a lot of people over the last month have been grappling with a lot of questions in terms of their own production. And so what I'm going to talk about today is, these are perhaps conversations you've already had, and some of that might just help in thinking through some of the decisions that need to be made over the next little while. And other things might hopefully spark some ideas or offer some insights into ways that you can approach some of the challenges that we're going to have over the coming season. But I think the thing that we can be confident right now that we're operating in a sector that is an essential service. People need to eat. People are going to be looking for food, and they're going to be looking for food from growers that they know and that they trust. And so a lot of the work that you've done over the past number of years to build your business, to develop your customer base, those people are going to be looking for you. And right now, you have the job of figuring out how you're going to get food to them in a way that is efficient and that is safe for both you, your employees, as well as your customers. And so we'll work through some of that here. Oh, and there we go. And so appreciate the fact that the Ministry of Agriculture has been thinking through of all the different aspects of the sector that need support right now, and that today we're looking really at small to medium scale producers who generally are selling product not through established commodity markets. So this means people who have been doing direct to consumer, say more direct to retailers or to restaurants, and where that have those relationships with customers, but may have been disrupted recently. And so I want to start by talking just generally about risk. I mean, obviously, every business that starts up has some inherent risk to it. And some of that risk is going to be amplified right now by this crisis. And some of those risks will seem insignificant in relation to what we're dealing with overall right now in terms of everyone's attention being focused on this one issue. And so it's important to recognize coming into this that no one enters this discussion or the situation of a pandemic with a blank slate. We've all have other things that were of concern before this. Some of those things may not seem as important right now, but they may come back as important later. Some of them are still there, and they're still things that you need to consider. So when we're dealing with, for example, food safety with regard to, or worker safety with regard to COVID-19, that doesn't diminish the risk that we have around, say, food safety and other foodborne contamination. We know that there are businesses that were in a weak position coming into this situation that aren't going to survive. And one of the most important things right now is being able to anticipate risk and being able to plan for it. So that's a really strong position to be in. So rather than saying, well, that'll never happen. So in agriculture, for example, obviously the current situation we're in is pretty huge compared to what anyone was really thinking through on a regular basis. But if you put it into context of, rather than saying, well, that's very unlikely, ask the question, has it happened before? Well, we've had issues before, everything from swine flu to avian flu, H1N1. So we know pandemics can happen. It's the scale and so on. But that within agriculture, we know that there's risk, and we take precautions to minimize that risk. And so instead of saying, well, that'll never happen, or just ignoring things, like we know that hope is not going to be a very good strategy, we want to ask a question of, well, if this happens, how can we respond? Or when this happens, how can we respond? So we know that it's top of mind right now. What happens when the economy is opened up a bit more? How are we able to function within that? How will we respond? And so we don't want to ignore risk. Instead, we want to embrace it and say that being able to plan has the benefits of, number one, being ready to pivot to as things change, and things are changing regularly and quickly. It helps us to have a sense of how we can respond in different situations. But maybe one of the bigger things that it can do right now, especially for a lot of producers, is it helps you reduce stress. So it puts you in a stronger position, because the more you can anticipate potential outcomes and how you might respond to that, the better it puts you in a position to be able to have a menu of options in front of you to be able to carry forward. And so right now, when I was working through what we're talking about today, the risks that we're accounting for, while we have immediate risks, so this is loss or disruption of marketing channels. So that might be restaurants that are not open right now. It might be farmers markets that have either delayed their opening or are rethinking how they're going to operate. For some market vendors, obviously, it means not being able to go to market, but as a food vendor, you'll the markets here are open, at least in theory, most of the parts of the province. Another immediate risk would be that it's difficult to plan for the rest of the season. It's just, there are so many question marks as to who is going to be looking for what type of food. And then of course, there's a disruption to cash flow. The fact that your markets might not be as predictable, or cash may not come in the same way that it has in the past. And you have the potential for higher operating costs in terms of you may need more equipment to deal with sanitation, food safety. There may be fluctuations in costs of inputs. Not sure at this point if that's impacting anyone. But also on the other side, it could also mean lower revenue per market outlet. So if the number of people allowed into the farmers market are limited, it could mean that you don't have as many customers coming through. It could mean that if people are pre-ordering or picking pre-weighed units of product instead of taking from a bulk bin, that they may buy less. There may be less impulse buys that may have been a benefit to you in the past just by having things displayed in a certain way at the market. And now, looking at the longer term, we also have a set of risks. So basically, even though we're a month in, we're still sort of trying to find a pace for a marathon. So we have a likelihood of an economic depression, and how severe that is anyone's guess right now, but we don't really have anything to compare this against. We'll have long periods of instability, possible subsequent waves of infections. What this is going to mean for a lot of consumers is less disposable income and lower consumer confidence. So even if people do have money to spend, they may not feel confident going out shopping. And there's also a longer term risk. A lot of farms in the sector in general in BC has less storage capacity for storage crops, and this is particularly true for a lot of smaller and medium-sized farms. So that can be a risk if you're looking at changing parts of your crop plan. And so we want to get into a practice regularly of asking a few questions. And so sitting down, say on a weekly basis, if you have, if you work alone, this might just be your own time to sit down with your coffee in the morning and go through what's coming up. Or if you have family or it's a business with employees and you have regular business meetings, simply ask the question, has anything new emerged? Is there anything new that we need to know about or that could impact us? And so how can that impact our business? Is it a potential positive? Is it something we're going to have to change how we operate? And what changes then can we make to adapt? So looking at everything not as a roadblock, but more what do we have to do to work with this new situation? And so that's where identifying the risk doesn't mean like complete shutdown, don't move forward. It means, well, what can we do to adapt? And great side of this is farmers and entrepreneurs in general have to do this on a regular basis. It's just that now we're doing it maybe more frequently and on a larger scale than we've had to in the past. But I'm thinking right now, like we farm on a floodplain, we know that we have a high snowpack, so we're looking regularly at what's going on. What is the snowmelt looking like? What is the rainfall in the forecast looking like? How could this impact our business? What changes can we make to adapt? So we're used to doing this. We do it on an annual basis. And we just have to apply that same logic to the current situation that we're in. So I'll shift gears away from the risk and looking at numbers for evaluating your crops. And I'll just pause for a second here. We're gonna look at questions when we get, I guess, to the end of this part when looking at the numbers. So we want to set out a framework for how can the information that you have about your business contribute to making decisions going forward. And so we'll ask the question, what do you know about your crops? And so if you already do cost of production analysis, you have a good understanding of your crops margins. So that's essentially which crops provide you with the best profit potential. If you don't have cost of production analysis, you can take some time to determine your most profitable crops. And I want to underscore here that profitable crops are not necessarily your highest revenue crops. So a lot of times people will look at their sales for the year and they'll say, well, I sold the most of this product. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your most profitable crop. It means it's the one most in demand by your customers. So some crops are popular, but they also have high production costs, such as labor, fertility, packaging. But also, if you're not charging enough, simply, like if your price point is too low, you may be losing money every time you sell a unit of that crop. So despite the fact it's popular, it may not be profitable. And the third bubble here, using enterprise budgets to support your crop evaluation. This is a tool from the Kwantlen Polytechnic University's Institute for Sustainable Food Systems. They have a set of enterprise budgets that's based on actual farms in the Lower Mainland. So they have a website, and I'll just pause to note that in your control panel for this webinar, there's a set of handouts. And so the handouts that are there, you can download the PDFs. One of them is I'll just pull them up here. One of them is a farming resources COVID-19.pdf. And so that has links to anything that I'm referencing during this webinar. So it's a one-pager that just has the URLs for the different websites that I may reference. And then another one that might be useful as we're going through this is the ballpark cost of production. And so if you don't do cost of production analysis for your business right now, you might value from sitting down this weekend and doing a little bit of time in looking at the numbers that you do have and estimating which of your products that you produce are profitable and which ones aren't. And we're going to go through that in a moment with an example and discuss why that would be the case. All right. So as I said, popularity and profitability are not the same thing. Each crop that you grow has its own cost of production. And so that cost of production includes the labor, it includes all of the inputs, as well as the overhead for your business. And so when we're asking the question, how much does it cost me to grow this crop? If we can answer that question, we can make strategic decisions about what to sell and at what price. And so you may be at a point in time in your growing season where you're still questioning, do I put all of this certain type of crop in the ground or should I do something else? And so where that might be a key question is if you've relied very much on restaurant sales to this point and you don't know, number one, if those restaurants are going to be able to open, or number two, if they're going to be in existence after this is over. They may be, if they have to close permanently, are you going to be stuck with a lot of product that you can't sell otherwise? And so that could be a high-end salad mix that you do that restaurants are willing to pay a premium for, but at a retail basis, people may not have the same interest in paying that price point. Or we may be in a situation where people simply aren't able to afford the price point on what's considered a luxury good. So understanding what are profitable crops, and if they're popular, in what market are they popular? And is that, can we make a reasonable guess as to whether or not that popularity is going to continue? And so one other distinction that I want to make here is production costs versus marketing costs. There's the cost to actually produce a crop. That's to get the crop in the ground, to manage it, and to harvest it. And then there's a cost of marketing the crop as well. And this is what a lot of farms don't take into consideration. So they'll stand at the farmer's market all day, not pay themselves, and consider that to be part of the job, as opposed to understanding that it costs money to go to the farmer's market. It costs money to spend your whole day there. It takes you away from other tasks that you might do on the farm or time with your family. So there's a cost of growing the product, and there's a cost of marketing it. The more you can understand the cost that it takes to produce your crop, the better position you're in to understand what is an ideal marketing scenario. So if you don't currently do your own marketing, if you sell to a wholesaler, knowing your cost of production is really important because you need to understand what is the price that you need to be able to get for a product so that you're not losing money. But if you're shifting into a situation where you may be selling collectively with other farms right now and trying to understand, well, what is the cost of actually producing the product versus the cost of marketing it, you need to be able to balance those out, because there is a cost for marketing, and you need to make sure that if you're working with other people and you're doing most of the marketing work, that you're being compensated fairly, and likewise that there's enough of a margin for someone else doing the marketing, if that's the case, that you're going where someone else is doing your marketing for you. So we'll circle back to this in a couple of minutes. But if you look at the cost of production, the ballpark cost of production worksheet, it gives you the steps that you can print out to work through what I'm going to look at right here. So this is just a really rough and dirty cost of production analysis. It's not going to take into account the subtleties that you may experience in your business, such as like one crop is obviously going to cost more to grow than another crop. But it'll give you, if you don't have a lot of numbers to work with right now, this will help you at least set an understanding. And so within that, the first step is really adding up all your costs. So how much does it cost you to run your farm for the year? And that should include not only the costs that you're looking at on paper that you've recorded, but also your labor. If you haven't recorded your labor, how much does that cost? As well as a profit goal. How much money do you want available at the end of the season to be able to reinvest in your business or to pay yourself more? So add up all of your costs for the entire operation. And so if you're looking at the ballpark estimation of cost of production, that's the number that you put in line 1, or the box associated with line 1. The next thing you want to do is divide your growing area. So what units do you use? If you grow crop by the acre, you may use acres as your unit of growing area. If you grow by bed and all of your beds are the same length, you may use beds. On my farm, I use bed feet, simply because we have beds that are different length. So just in the layout that we're on, we can't have them all the same length. And so we use bed feet so that we can understand a common unit of measurement. And I'm just thinking, if you're not, this is very crop production biased. So if you're doing livestock, I apologize. I don't know what the spacing is for planting a cow, but maybe you would use something like your paddocks, or again, like by pasture, or your stocking units, or so on. But you're going to looking at what is the area, or what is the measurement by which you assess your capacity. And then looking at step 3, you're going to divide by the yield of a particular crop for that same unit of growing space. So where you would find this information is at the end of the season. If you keep records for how much you've sold, look at what is the total volume of a product you've sold over the season. If you don't have that data, do a ballpark figure of estimating how much crop should you be able to grow in a given space. And so we know that, like when we're growing lettuce, for example, we use 12-inch spacing, 3 rows per bed. So on a 400-foot bed, we should be able to fit 1,200 heads of lettuce. We generally are budgeting for 20 to 30% of that to not be saleable or not get sold because of maturity dates and so on. And so that gives us a rough ballpark of, let's say, 900 heads of lettuce in a 400-foot bed. So if we look at that over the number of plantings for the season, just get a rough idea of what is the yield for that crop over a given growing space. And to walk through that, what it looks like is, we'll say for step 1, we're going to take that number that you find on line 1 of the worksheet. What is your total farm expenses? And then step 2, what is your total growing area? So I just did a rough calculation on our farm. We have about just under 40,000 bed feet. So if we add up the length of all of our beds, if we were to put them all together, we have just under 40,000 bed feet. And so when for line 3 on the worksheet is divide expenses and profit by your total growing area. So I just made up a number here. We say it costs us $250,000 to run our farm and for our profit margin and so on, and we divide that by the total growing area, we're left with a number of $6.31. And that's the cost per bed foot across our entire operation. So if we take all of our costs and we allocate it to each unit of growing area, we know that we have to be able to produce $6.31 then from each bed foot on our farm to cover our expenses, our labor, and our profit. All right. So now that so basically, let's consider that the rent. That's the price that a crop has to pay to have the opportunity to live on our farm. Now, if we go to the next step in this, let's say last year we grew 7,810 pounds of carrots, or that's what we harvested and sold. And that was grown over 2,100 bed feet. So this, I'm able to look at my crop plan from last year and say, how much space did we plant as carrots? And I'm able to look at my sales records and say, how many pounds did we harvest? And if you don't have numbers that are that like, if you had trouble with some of your record keeping, do a rough estimate. How many carrots did you sell each week? Over how many weeks? Get a rough ballpark. And so if we put that, the average yield for this crop in line 5 and the growing area for the crop, 2,100 feet, we're going to divide the yield by the growing area to get the yield per growing unit. So this is the yield per bed foot. So we know we have 3.72 pounds per bed foot. All right, so if the numbers are seeming a little bit overwhelming right now, use the worksheet. It'll help you to think this through if you don't already have cost of production analysis, but I hopefully can see how this is going to be useful in a moment. So remember that number we had, it's on line 3, but from 2 slides ago, $6.31 per bed foot that we need to earn on our farm. Well, the average price we received for carrots was $2.50 per pound. And so if we know we got 3.72 pounds per bed foot, carrots generated $9.30 per bed foot. So what we're doing is taking that 3.72 pounds, that yield, and multiplying it by the average price we received for those carrots. And that's $9.30 per bed foot. So if we divide, so that gives us a ballpark that we know that we're getting more from carrots than the minimum required. So that minimum required $6.31 per bed foot, that's in order to cover our costs, to pay ourselves, and have some money left over to reinvest in our farm the next season. And so at this price and this yield, we are earning about $3 more per bed foot than the minimum that we need. So that's not bad. And then if we take $6.31, the minimum that we need, and divide that by the yield we're getting, we learn that $1.69 is our minimum price for this product. So what that tells us is if we went to the farmer's market and we couldn't sell our product for $2.50 a pound, we could look at it and say, well, geez, if we need to lower our price, at what point are we going to lose money? So we know that if we go below $1.69 per pound, we're going to be losing money. But as long as we can get $1.69 per pound, we're covering all of our costs, we're paying ourselves, and we have a profit margin to reinvest and start up the farm again the next season. And so that information can be useful for me because let's say the farmers markets are really not going well, but a home delivery service calls me and says, hey, we need 200 pounds of carrots every week, and we can pay you $1.75 a pound. And we look at it and say, well, geez, $1.75 a pound, we're still making more than the minimum we need to break even, to pay ourselves, and to have a profit margin. So that's okay, we can do that. And now we just send them a whole bunch of carrots every week. We don't have to worry about marketing them. That's their job. So that's great. But if we talk to a wholesaler and the wholesaler said, hey, we need carrots, we can sell all the carrots you've got, we'll pay you 80 cents a pound. Well, now we know that that's too low to cover our cost. So we're going to lose money by sending those carrots at 80 cents a pound. So it helps us to differentiate what it is that we can and can't do. And that's really important information when you have to make decisions on a day-by-day basis as to how you're going to move your product and what options are going to be available for you for marketing. So this helps in setting prices. So your cost of production really is your basement price. You don't want to go lower than this cost. That basement price might be really useful for you if you decide you want to sell some wholesale or to retailers or anyone who is like a veggie delivery service. And what we do on our farm, for example, is we take our cost of production and then we add a 50% markup for our direct-to-consumer sales. So we do that markup to help us to understand what should we be charging at the market in order to cover the cost of marketing our product. So we actually take our product, we sell it to ourselves for our CSA, we sell it to ourselves for our market, and we do that markup to consider if I'm going to be spending a whole day at the farmer's market and all the cost of going to the farmer's market and yeah, just everything involved in that, we need to make sure we cover the cost. And so when you have these numbers in front of you, they can help you to make decisions. There will be crops that clearly lose money. If you grow a lot of crops, it's unlikely that all of those crops are making you money unless you do your cost of production analysis regularly. And by sitting down and doing a little bit of work, you can make some decisions. Some of them you might just want to cut out. Like, don't grow a crop now that's going to lose you money just because it's popular. Or alternatively, if there are crops that are losing your money, you can ask the question, what price do you need to charge in order to make it profitable? And so that's at the bottom of the worksheet. I asked the question, is the price you currently charge above or below the minimum price that you've calculated on line 12? If the price is low, are you able to either increase your price or increase your yield? Maybe the numbers you're using, it was just from a really bad year. And so if those numbers are really low as far as your yield, look back a couple of years and see what does a good year look like, what does a bad year look like, and average those out. And then can you also decrease the amount of the crop that's grown? So if it's not paying its rent in your field, do you need to keep it there, or do you have another crop that could earn more money? The next question to ask is, what crops pose a higher risk? Are there crops that consistently underperform that you have problems with? So I'll just give an example. Cucumbers have been a terrible crop for us. We used to be able to grow them really well. We just have a disease pressure that more often than not, we're losing large parts of our crop. And we just haven't been able to get that in hand. And so it became such a high risk crop that we decided just not to grow it anymore. Let's give that area of the field a break. Or there might be crops that pose a high risk because the customers you used to sell them to aren't operating. So restaurants, salad greens, flowers, are those high risk crops that you simply don't know if you're going to be able to sell them at the same level or the same price point that you were before. And then third, using these numbers can help you see if there are areas where you can reduce costs. So maybe if things are getting to a crunch point and you're like, so I'm thinking from organic production, do you use an organic fertilizer or compost? Are there advantages for one versus the other for the nutrient needs that you need for your crops? Are there options you have for mechanically harvesting some crops versus a manual harvest? Is there a cost of marketing yourself versus a reduced price, but the advantage of wholesaling in that you're selling a lot of product and not having to worry about the marketing? Knowing these numbers can really help you to make decisions. Now, just to put this in perspective, we can ask the question, where is your time best spent? And so this is a graphic that came from the Basin Food and Buyers Expo in the Kootenays 2 years ago. So considering your marketing costs and those options, we can ask, what are the margins and markups? So you know that your product cost, this is your the product cost that you have for an item, it's the total cost for you to manufacture or produce one unit of that product. And then there's a distributor price. So this is the price you're going to sell that product to the distributor. So that's where you're working in your profit margin. So that'll be 30 to 50%. And then the wholesale price is the price that that distributor is going to sell to a retailer or a restaurant. And they're generally using a 20 to 30% margin. And then there's the price the end customer pays. This is the price on the grocery shelf, and they also are looking for a margin there. And so to understand fully, there might be an advantage to you to sell to a distributor because all of this work is something you're not having to do, but it means ultimately you're getting a lower cost for your product. And if you know what the cost is that you need for your product, that can help you to make those decisions. And so then you can look at understanding how your pricing fits your marketing options. So you can either start with what is your cost of production and look at what are the different margins that are being added to it along the way. So if it costs you $1 and you're selling it to a distributor for $1.67, they're then adding their markup. So it's $2.31 to the retailer, and they're adding their margin. So they're going to sell that product that costs you $1 to produce for $3.85. Or likewise, if you go to the store and you look at a product, or you go to the farmer's market and see what are people selling the product for, $4 a pound or $4 for a unit, look at, well, so then what is the price that is being charged at the distribution level to the retailer and then to the distributor, and does the production cost to you still add up so that it makes sense in doing this? The reason I point this out is not, I mean, a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, well, see, it just shows the producer gets such a small amount of the end price. What I want to emphasize is that if you're doing direct to consumer sales, you really have to account for the amount of work that goes into this end of things to sell it. And if that is essential to you being able to stay in business, then that's great. It's good to know that and then plan accordingly. If you don't need all of this like extra work, and you can be profitable selling your product for your cost of production plus a profit markup, that's great. Then you can sell with confidence that you're earning what you need and that someone else can do this work who is better adept at the marketing side. And within this, the important thing is to understand what are your goals. Your business and your expenses are going to look different from your neighbor. So just because someone else is wholesaling doesn't mean you have to wholesale. Just because someone else is going to the farmer's market doesn't mean you have to go to the farmer's market. There are many different options, and just knowing your numbers helps you to have confidence when you're making these decisions. I'll just go through one more slide here and then we'll stop to see if there are questions. One of the questions that I think you should be asking yourself, and I've touched on this already, are there luxury crops or items that are highly perishable? So these might be crops with a high price point or that have a short shelf life that might be more challenging to sell. So two that came to mind for me were flowers. They might be subject to event cancellations this year. People may have less disposable income, and they have a short shelf life. That doesn't mean, so it doesn't mean don't grow flowers. It means that if you grow flowers, you might have a risk associated with that crop that you need to think through what are alternative ways of selling the product, especially for you've already paid for seeds, for bulbs. A lot of these things are already in the ground. So how do you pivot and figure out other ways of getting flowers that people can use? Another one might be high-end salad greens. So if you sell a lot of salad greens at a really high price point, what happens if people, like restaurants, are not in operation, or people are not looking to spend the same amount on their groceries? They'd rather buy a head of lettuce and make a simple salad than a high-end salad. And then consider whether there'll be the same market for these items this year. Are people, so that's when we're looking at the salad versus head lettuce, are people going to be looking for the same items? And are there going to be the same market outlets? And then can you mitigate some of these risks by pre-arranging sales or adjusting crop plans? So some of the things you may want to mix up what you're growing, or simply look at what can you pre-arrange to sell. So does that mean increasing your CSA numbers or working with another farm that does a CSA so that you know where the product is going to go at a certain point? Could areas that haven't been planted with flowers, for example, be supplemented with veggies? Could you work to move product through partnerships with other farms? What are some of the options that are out there that help you to change what you're doing to ensure that you can find a market for those crops right now? I'll just pause for a moment. Emily, are there questions that we need to get to at this point?
Hi, Chris. So no, right now, no questions. So you can keep on going on.
All right. So if you do have questions, feel free to pop them into the question box and we will get to them as we go. So another question that you might have that you might have to pose to yourself about your business is whether or not there are key investments you can make. So consider whether there are tools or equipment you can invest in right now that are going to reduce your operating costs or increase your efficiency. So those might be tools in the field that decrease harvest time, or tools that have the capacity to extend the shelf life of a product. So what that might look like is simply, if you don't have a cooler right now, it might be the possibility of having a cooler that gives extra days to your product rather than having to send it to the farmer's market, or like basically sell it the day you harvest it or the day after you harvest it. It can mean things like, if you're digging potatoes by hand, what is a basic harvesting equipment that you can hook up behind a walk behind or a small tractor that is going to cut your time significantly or reduce the amount of labor that's required. And we're going to circle back to answering a question about, like, well, okay, there are things, obviously we all have a wish list, but what do we consider for whether or not we can afford to pay for some of these, especially during a time of rapid change and crisis. So another question, so some of those investments might look like, what is your storage capacity? So you might look at mitigating risk by being able to store product. So I know that the price on squash, for example, is not great, especially if you're selling wholesale. It's not that great in September and October when everyone has squash, but the price you can get for your squash increases quite substantially if you can store it into January, February. So you might be asking, are there items that you can grow that can be stored into the winter and achieve higher prices? Or likewise, do other farms have excess storage capacity that they'd like to rent out or that you can collaborate on? If you have perishable items like berries, do you have freezer capacity or do you have access to freezer capacity so that you're not, again, at the whim of the market, that you're expecting people to show up and buy fresh berries, and if they don't, then you don't have the capacity to deal with them? Are there sensitive crops that aren't worth the risk? This might be the year to make really what otherwise are tough decisions. There might be crops you enjoy growing but simply don't make you money. So going back to that cost of production analysis, there might be crops that just aren't worth the risk, or they might be crops that you know you can grow, but they have more frequent crop failures just because of everything that's involved in, they need a certain amount of heat units, or it's just they require a lot of your time and attention. They simply might not be worth the risk at this point in time. And coming back to that storage capacity, a shipping container and a CoolBot might be a basic investment that supports your ability to extend product sale periods. So if you don't have that, or it's something you can scale up, increase your cooler capacity, that might be a really simple way of thinking through some way of extending your sales periods on your product. And then looking at labor requirements, and ask the question, some of your crops could be managed more easily with key investments in equipment, thus reducing your reliance on labor. Or you might alternatively look at identifying your key labor requirements, such as which crops are entirely dependent upon labor availability, and either think through, are you going to make a push? Like, are there jobs that you can get people to come in and help you with based on their availability, come in for a day or two just to help you? And are there key crunch points when you're going to need that help? Or are you going to need to hire more people? Or simply, you might be in a situation where the labor that you've had in the past, for whatever reason, isn't available. I know a lot of farms, their hiring plans, there were people that were going to, like, whether it was temporary foreign workers or even people were coming from other parts of Canada and then decided not to, or that it was too risky, or they didn't want to be that far away from their regular lives, so they canceled their plans. So you have the option of either figuring out, are you going to try to hire more labor locally, or simply looking at other crops that are not entirely dependent upon that labor. So think through all of the tasks that are involved. So if you're in cropping, think about the transplanting or the weeding, irrigation, harvest, sales, other commodities, looking at what are the key crunch points, either with like calving, points when you need to move livestock, points of sale, all of those areas leading up, are there certain points where you have a high dependency on labor? And if so, start to flag those points in your calendar and think ahead to how are you going to ensure that you have the available labor? Is that going to be extra family? Is it going to be hiring? Is it going to be simply calling in friends and family to have all hands on deck at those key points in time? Those are some of the questions. Or is it simply looking at ways that you can reduce your reliance on labor? So we're gonna switch gears now and look at marketing. That's having gone through the production side of things. I'll just pause once more in case, are there any questions at this point?
So there's one question here. I'm just going to read it out to you from Lauren. Chris, do you find that consumer habits change depending on where in the Lower Mainland you are selling your products? How do you factor in these habits and diversities in your crop production analysis?
Yeah.
Or so how do you determine your target audience?
Yeah, so I think that this is one of the things that is sort of key right now that everyone is trying to figure out. And being over a month into it, we know that obviously people are cooking at home a lot more. And I would say that from the farms that I've spoken to that do either like CSA or box programs, that people are making plans for being around over the summer. And I mean, this is the directive that we've had from the public health officer, and that simply this is not the year to go traveling. This is not the year for big events. And so people are making plans for staying at home. And I think that what that's reflecting in is really high demand at the consumer, like the retail level, as opposed to the more industrial side, where you have larger processing and manufacturing or higher use, like restaurants, cafeterias, and so on. And so the consumer patterns that we're seeing are people are looking for more raw ingredients to be able to use at home. There's a price point that people are being very price conscious, and I think that people are nervous because there's also been discussions as companies are having to change supply chains to adjust to this high retail demand. There may be price points that are increasing, or as processing plants like we see in Alberta right now, the capacity around beef processing has been drastically reduced over a very quick period. And so people are sort of bracing for what is that going to look like in terms of pricing. And they're wanting to, I think that this is really for a lot of farms that have done a lot of work to develop a local customer base. This is where people are depending on you. Like, this is where you've developed those relationships and you have a huge opportunity. And even if you haven't been the one on the front lines doing that work, like you haven't wanted to go to farmers markets to this point, the farmers markets right now, they're food only outlets. And people are looking, like the markets that have opened in Vancouver and surrounding area, and I saw as Kelowna as well, there's high demand. Like, people are willing to show up. They know who they're getting the food from. There's that level of trust, there's that relationship. And so I think what we're seeing is that people are really looking at putting their dollars in a local space. That's certainly true with, like, I think the existing customers who have already frequented these areas. I think that there's a lot of, like, there's sort of a mainstream customer base who haven't purchased local in the past, and this is not going to inspire them to go out to a farmer's market, for example. They're going to be looking at where they bought the food in the past. But I think that this is a real opportunity to strengthen those relationships those pre-existing relationships that you've had with customers previously. So I think that the key things to keep in mind in your own crop planning are when people are stressed financially, what are they looking for? Are they looking for high-end products, or are they looking for basics? So, I mean, when we look at what are things that people really love to get at the market, both for flavor and value, like tomatoes, potatoes, cucumbers, carrots, like just your basic fruits and vegetables. And I'm thinking the same thing along the lines of meat, like the things that allow people to cook complete meals at home, full flavor, good value, like in terms of they know where the food is coming from, that they're willing to put the money into making sure that they have healthy food on the table. So I guess that's a good segue in looking
Yeah,
at marketing, but go ahead.
nope,
Sorry, was
that's
there?
I think that's a good one. There's one more question we'll save for the end though.
Okay,
I think that if we can just go through with the rest, that'd be great. Thanks,
all
Chris.
right. Okay. So the reorientation of marketing right now is, as I just said, everyone's trying to assess what is going to work. Like there are a lot of people, well, everyone needs to eat. And in that regard, farms are in a strong position. Um, Now, if you were completely dependent upon restaurants, remember that they're also having to reinvent their services. And we see like restaurants right now really working hard to stay alive. And so I've seen everything from some restaurants opening like offering pantry packages. So selling breads, salads, like just basic ingredients that help people with their meal planning, selling ingredients from the farms that they have bought from in the past. So say you can buy a loaf of bread plus ingredients from some of the farms that may have supplied the items on the menu previously. They're doing takeout options. So there are a lot of restaurants that are pivoting right now in trying to figure out how they can continue their operations at some level to at least earn some revenue or maintain relationships with customers. And we don't know what this is going to look like long term, and we don't know how many are going to be able to stay open. But the one question is, if you've sold to restaurants in the past, can you continue to work with them on this? And then understanding that people are eating from home more and they're away less over the summer, so they are looking for food to use. So that's positive in terms of what we're walking into. But we look at restaurants, as I said, many are offering takeout and grocery options, and they're maintaining contact with clients during the crisis. And I would encourage you to, if you work with restaurants, check in with them, see how it's going. Of course, the downside of this is that there are restaurants that simply won't reopen. And regardless of the current efforts, sales to restaurants are going to be lower. So we're talking right now that even if restaurants are allowed to open next month, it's probably going to be with 50% capacity. So we're seeing what some of the fallout is going to look like going forward in terms of the next year of eating out. And there's a question of whether people are going to be confident enough to go to a restaurant. I think a lot of people are still going to be more comfortable at home. When we look at community shared agriculture, if you've done a box program before, you know that there is the benefit that it's prepaid, it's a guaranteed sale. A lot of people are staying at home this summer. I know that the farms in the Lower Mainland that I've talked to, including my own, that have CSA programs, they've seen a huge increase in demand. So there's that supportive customer base. These are people that want to have a connection with a farm. Another benefit of a community shared agriculture program is you have the ability for multiple farms to work together. It doesn't have to be just one farm. You can, like we do a fruit option with a farm from the interior. That's like there are multiple veggie growers can work together to make sure that they're all able to supply the capacity that's there and share the overhead. And we have organizations like Farm Folk City Folk right now that are promoting the model. So it's in people's attention space. They're aware of it, they're looking for it. But on the other side, the downside is that it requires a lot of organizational skills and logistics to do well. And so that's where, if it's something you haven't done before, I would encourage you to think through, like, are there other people who have done it that you could partner up with? Or if you have the organizational skills and you're willing to put some work into the logistics, really think it through. So that you can think through all the eventualities and make sure that it runs smoothly. Of course, the other downside is that sometimes people are signing up for a service they don't fully understand. And I think that like this worries me somewhat, that people have panic bought CSA shares. And so they have misaligned expectations. And so we see this often when there's a news article about a CSA and like other seasons, people sign up and they're thinking of it like a grocery delivery service. They're not thinking of it as a predetermined box contents. And so ultimately, running a CSA program requires experience and skill to produce enough product each week. So if you're committed to doing 50 boxes each week, you have to produce 50 units of each product to go in those boxes every week of the season, as opposed to going to a market where you can take what you have, put it on the table, and sell. Now, looking at the farmers market, we have a lot of really good things that have happened in BC over the last number of years with farmers markets. They're established, they draw a steady customer base. You can take the product that you have, you don't have minimum amounts required. And the thing this year is that they've, with the funding from the Ministry of Agriculture, they've been able to set up a partnership with Local Line to be able to do pre-order options. So there's the option of like listing your product ahead of time. People can order it and simply come and do pickup at the market instead of having to go like wait in line, choose their items, and then go through checkout. The downside of farmers markets, of course, it's always difficult to anticipate sales. So a rainy day can wash out your week's profits. And I think that this year, what a lot of farms are considering is whether there's potentially fewer customers that are able to go through, like with the cap of 50 people at gatherings. Are there people who are going to decide not to come back or that don't want to wait in line? So farmers markets may not be as convenient for some people, and it's not a social draw. Like a lot of things that people love about farmers markets is going for the social event, and it's not going to be that this year. So really thinking through as a food vendor, you have the opportunity of taking advantage of those pre-order online options so that you're making it convenient and efficient for people. Now, if we look at online sales, there's a really good benefit of that. It allows you to plan your harvests and distribution. So you harvest what you know you've already sold, and then you distribute that. It allows for physical distancing, and it allows for customized orders. Now, the drawback to online sales is that it does require a network to publicize your offerings. So if you need a way of getting word out that you're doing this. So a lot of people have good social media networks right now. Just understanding like Instagram and Twitter, for example, you often have followers all over the place. They're not necessarily as locally defined. And so that can be, you may have a lot of followers that you can announce things to. They're not necessarily people who are in your area that are going to be buying. And then the other downside to online stores is that people often think of e-commerce as sort of a magic wand, but it requires a lot of logistics and planning. So you need to treat, if you're doing an online order system, you need to treat it like any other market. You have to put the attention into developing your customer base and then fulfilling orders in a way that's systematic, that's accurate, so people are getting what they ordered in a timely way, that they're not having to like hold their breath and bite their tongue hoping that everything works out on a weekly basis. It has to be convenient, both for you and for them. If we look at selling to grocery stores, I mean, this might be an avenue that you're looking at because they're already set up. If you have local green grocers, and that's really what I'm thinking here, like green grocers in terms of like independent grocery stores, you have the ability to form relationships with local merchants. They may place larger orders. So you can do those larger orders to retailers who can make those significant sales for you. Green grocers are often looking for unique products so that they can say it's from a local grower. The downside is like larger retailers will require a GAP certification. So if you don't have that, like this is not the time to look at the certification, I don't think. The orders may fluctuate. I think a lot of people think of stores as selling a lot, but if you're trying to sell them kale, think of how many bunches of kale they actually sell in a week. They may be looking for a half case of 12. So that might not be totally what you're looking for. Their ordering may depend on your price. So if you're not able to provide them with a price that allows them to do a markup to cover their own margins, then that might not work for you. And they're going to want a consistent supply. So they want to know that they can get the same products from you on a weekly basis over a course of a period of time. So if we're looking at the best practices in marketing, I would say be clear about your marketing channels and communicate that to your customers. So you don't want to get into a habit of trying to sell things here and there and that you're just making continuous expectations that end up eating your time and energy. So one of the things that we've always done on our farm is we say we're not set up to do farm gate sales. We don't want people just showing up at our farm to see if they can buy stuff. So we make it very clear, we're at this farmer's market on this day, we sell through this CSA program, and we sell to these restaurants. That's it. So try to do the same thing. If you're focusing on online ordering, direct people to the online ordering, direct them to picking up at a certain time when you're able to accommodate that. Otherwise, the marketing side can end up eating all of your time and energy for very little return. If you're doing any kind of a new marketing option, do a dry run. So ask friends and family to try ordering. If you set up an online site, ask them to give it a try. Practice printing out your order sheets. Practice doing a pack session. Ensure the payment options are properly integrated into your website. So do all of this ahead of time. Don't launch the website without having tested it. Determine what works best for you and what works best for your customers. So something might work really well for you in theory, but your customers, it doesn't really work for them. So that might be determining where people pick up. So if they're used to going to the farmer's market and you can use your farmer's market stand as a place for people to pick up, that's great. But also remember to price for what you're actually offering. So if you're doing custom orders and you're doing delivery, those take time and resources. So make sure you're charging for that. That's where I talked about like that 50% markup from your cost of production to your sales number. Make sure you're paying yourself to do the extra work. And I think that that's really the key thing right now, is that everything this summer is going to take more work. It's going to take more time. If you're thinking of working with other people, the social distancing, it's going to just be more cumbersome. So make sure that you build into this that you're able to cover your costs. Another avenue for best practices on marketing is if you set up a box program or a subscription, don't dump product. Like don't use it as a way for simply getting rid of that 500-foot bed of chard that you planted and don't know what to do with it. People want quality product. They want stuff they can use in their kitchen. They don't want you simply saying, well, I've got too much of this, so I'm going to put it in the box. And one of the key things is ask for help. So like this is, it may seem cliche at this point, or like we've heard it too many times, but we really are all in this together. One of the biggest mistakes farmers can make is thinking that they have to figure it out on their own. So share ideas with colleagues, get feedback from friends and family. Think through your transaction process. So right now, do you need new supplies? So a lot of farmers markets this past year have been trying to phase out plastic bags and so on. Well, plastic bags are back in. So do you need new supplies? Are there things you have to order? Think that through early, because some of these supplies are harder to find right now because there's increased demand. Sanitation supplies, like so squirt bottles that you can put hydrogen peroxide dilution in for sanitizing things at pickup sites or at markets. Are you prepared for non-cash transactions? So is a non-cash transaction going to be people paying online, or is it going to be tapping when they pick up or come to the farmer's market? What does that look like? Do you have enough data in your wireless plan? Do you need to order any supplies? So if you're set up with Square, for example, do you need a new reader or anything like that to be able to accept non-cash transactions? And think through how many orders can you realistically pre-pack? That's one thing I've thought about a lot, like in terms of the number of people we have go through a farmer's market. Can we really pack that many orders, custom pack them ahead of time? And so that's where I start to think about hybridizing offerings. So a lot of the things that I've gone through in terms of like, these are like CSAs, farmers markets, they're not new, but in these times of crisis, I think that the lines that have been drawn between them really are irrelevant in a lot of ways. And so think of, if you're offering online ordering, you can do predetermined boxes. So say it's going to be a $20 box of product that's available this week, or a $50 box, or a $75 box, and people can choose simply how much do they want. And so there's a CSA element that it's a predetermined box, but people don't have to buy it every week. So you could list it for pickup at farmers markets. You could even have pre-packed like sort of grab bag boxes at the market. So people just take a box, pay for it, and go. And then you can adjust the number of boxes available based upon what you have. So people don't have a subscription like in a CSA, but they can get a box of whatever the product is from your farm that week. And you can simply say, this week I have 20 boxes available. The next week it's gone up, I have 40 boxes available. So you can adjust those numbers based upon what you have. On the other side, collaborating with other farms and remembering that you don't have to do this alone. So there might be another farm that has a CSA wait list right now, and they could support moving more product for other farms. Can you collaborate together? Can you refer people? If you have a full wait list, can you refer people to another farm? Or look at, say, a sprout grower, a veggie grower, a mushroom grower, a fruit grower, a flower grower, a poultry producer, could all put together a weekly box. So look at the farms in your area or at your market. Can you do something working together? And I think one of the really key things right now is we know that this is a long process. And so the choices you're making, think through how will this build your business? Use this as an opportunity to build, to consider your efforts. How will this help you beyond the crisis? If you haven't had an online presence, this might be the opportunity to set up your e-commerce presence that's going to benefit you over the long term. Local Line is a platform that's been used by a number of farms across Canada in the previous few seasons. Now it's an option available to you. You're not having to pay the fees to use it through your farmer's market. This might be an option that benefits you over the long term in being able to better service your customers, to build alliances with other farmers, to recognize like we're not competitors. We're all growing food for people that need it in the province. So how can we collaborate to make that experience better for people? I'm just we were gonna pause for questions. I'm just gonna go through the last few slides though, and then we'll stop for questions at that point. I just wanted to highlight a few things around accessing support at this point. And there are a lot of questions that come up because the funding that has been announced so far for agriculture at a federal level is largely towards Farm Credit Canada for increased lending. And so that raises a question, how would you use financing wisely during a crisis? Because the general advice that we would give, if you're going to take on debt, use it to acquire revenue generating assets. So these are things like you can invest in a new piece of equipment that is going to help you to grow more product or to harvest more efficiently. It's going to save you money and time. You don't want to take on debt to cover operating costs. That's on a general sense. Like you can take on debt as a farmer to cover your operating costs, like a line of credit, until you actually have product available to sell during the season. But you don't want to use that debt as a constant, like covering like basically shortfalls in your profitability. But the emergency financing options that are there, you should consider them carefully. You don't want to take on emergency debt unless, number one, your business was previously profitable. So if your business was not profitable before, this is going to be an increasing challenge to you. And so you don't want to take on more debt right now. And number two, don't take on that emergency debt unless you have reasonable prospects to be profitable on the other end of this crisis. If this has totally knocked you off your feet, think through carefully, what is it you can do to put yourself in a positive position going through the coming year? And number three, if you would otherwise have to lay off people or avoid hiring people or delay capital investments that would be detrimental to your ability to operate, if you have to do those things, then maybe it's worth taking on some debt so that you don't have to lay those people off and completely handicap your business so that you're not able to move forward. And so if we look at what emergency lending is there, we have the Canadian Emergency Business Account, which is a federal program. It's available to help cover operating costs. And so when I said the rule of thumb is that you want to invest, use debt to invest in revenue generating assets, this is specifically for operating costs. In order to be eligible, you have to have payroll costs from 2019 of between $20,000 and $1.5 million. And the loans are for up to $40,000. They're available through your business's primary financial institution. So it has to have been your primary financial institution as of March 1st of this year. So you simply are, most of the banks and credit unions that are offering this are doing it through an online process. So you fill in your form online. And I guess the benefit of this program is that if you pay back 75% of the loan by the end of December 2022, 25% of the loan, so up to $10,000 is forgiven. But remember, so if you take out the full $40,000, you have to pay back $30,000 over the next year and a half. So consider that if that's possible. Other lending that's available, and the one thing I should say, you basically, you're promising if you open up one of these accounts that you're using it for operating costs, that you're not going out and like building a new barn, for example. If you can find a barn for $40,000, let me know. That's a good deal. But like for buying equipment. So there's other lending that's available. So Farm Credit Canada has conventional lending options for lines of credit and equipment financing. They have like increased amounts that they can lend right now, but they are going to use the same due diligence that they did before. So they don't have more money just to give out freely. This is lending, it's taking on new debt. But also if you have existing financing through Farm Credit Canada, you are able to request a payment deferral during this time, so for up to 12 months. And just to be clear, a payment deferral, that's not loan forgiveness. It's simply saying you don't have to make the payments right now, but you will have to make them in the future. So if you take a year off from paying them right now, it basically is going to add a year to the end of your financing. So rather than paying it off, say in 5 years, you'll be paying for 6, like an extra year beyond that. The resources handout that is available in the module has a whole bunch of resources there. If you have a CSA or any kind of delivery program, list it with Farm Folk City Folk. They have a really comprehensive web page with all of the offerings around the province. Growing for Market is a magazine out of the US. They've made their COVID-19 coping strategies and coping and strategizing articles free, available on their website. And the Young Agrarians has a really comprehensive resource page. They have a business resource page, but they also have a new overview of setting up e-commerce options. So they've been working with a lot of the farmers that are part of their mentorship program and their land matching program to set up their online sales platforms. And they have a really good review, a walkthrough of what you should do, what you should avoid, and what are the actual platforms that you can use. And so that takes me to the end of the slides I have. So I'll transition back here to questions. So Emily, do we have questions to work through?
We have a comment here from John who says that we have a wait list of CSA members, which we're constantly taking from as customers who have panic bought or canceling their shares as they don't understand that the farmers organize and arrange the products in the box.
Yeah.
A lot of people out there want flexibility, which we find is another layer of complexity in organizing and forecasting. So do you have any comments, Chris?
Yeah, I think that like that's the key thing with CSA is that you really want people signing up who understand the program. And so one of the things, I'll give you an example just that we're doing on our farm this year is we're phoning people. So we've always done our sign up as an online process where people get emails and so on. We find that people don't read emails at the best of times. And I don't know what your inboxes look like, but mine over the past month, it's this constant barrage of emails from companies telling me how they're handling COVID-19. If people are going to have that personal relationship with you, like a phone call from the farmer who's growing the food or a family member of the farmer may go a long way to them really understanding what it is. That's a huge investment in your time, but it may also relieve you later in the season of unhappy customers who realize what they've signed up for. And so it's really important to understand what that looks like. We also have the challenge right now in that we're saying, okay, well, if we're going to use local line for the farmers market that we go to and allow people to pre-order, is that going to upset some of our CSA members? So we have some CSA members who just got tired of standing in line at the farmers market. They wanted their Saturdays to themselves. And now they find out, oh, well, we could pre-order and go pick up at the farmer's market. You really want to treat your communication with those two different customer groups differently. So the way you communicate with your CSA members is really to emphasize like they've invested in the farm. They have a stake in it with you. You really depend upon them and their support and their understanding to go through the season with you. And that's a really great relationship to maintain. And if people aren't all in on that, you really probably don't want them as your CSA members. It's just not the program for you. And so if you're going to do something like custom boxes, like that's really hard to do. That's where I find like so many mistakes can be made. And there's this idea right now that if you can just do online ordering, it'll make everything better. It's a lot of work. You have to like basically like lay everything out. You have to go through, pick from each item according to a pick list for that order. It's going to take time. It may not, but so I guess here's the thing. I've tried doing custom CSAs before. I didn't like it. The idea of doing that this year and custom packing boxes, I really don't like it. And at the same time, I'm recognizing that it might be necessary right now. So it might be, that might be something simply to get through the season. In another season that maybe it's not really great. I think the key thing is to come back to what do you have the capacity to do? And maybe packing orders, like if that's something you really don't enjoy doing or you're really not enthusiastic about it, like that's an area you could ask for help. Or if you have a staff member who's really good with organizing and logistics, that's something to put them onto. And really like understanding what can get you through. Like perhaps if you need to access additional financing, like to make sure that you can maintain a staff like in place to work through that some of that with you. The other thing to consider though is like if you're doing custom orders through Local Line, there are different ways that each market are going to set it up. So some markets are simply setting it up that people place their order and then they go around the market and pick up their pre-packed order from different businesses. Other markets may choose that all of the product will be delivered to a central location and people will come and pick up one package that includes the things they've ordered from all of the different vendors. That's going to take a lot of work on the side of the market. And so it's going to take a really well put together market to be able to accomplish that. And so, yeah, you really have to look at your choices, but be careful. Like a CSA, it looks so great in so many ways, like people prepaying, you know, you've sold the food until people realize it's not what they want and they've panic bought. Like that's really a bad situation to be in as a farmer, to have to deal with that sort of customer relations in the middle of the season. Anything?
Great. Well, there's a couple questions here that are just directed mostly towards the ministry. And if you could send those actually to the Agri-Service one, just because I'm just aware that we're a bit over time here. But yes, all of the things you're saying about funding and things coming down the line, we're all very aware of priorities and we're working on them. So we can help give you a better response to a couple of those people. So Rachel, if you want to send an email to the Agri-Service email, that'd be great. I popped a couple things into the chat box. So one of the first thing is a link to the Agri-Service webinar. So there's quite a few questions about if this webinar is recorded, and yes, it has been recorded, and we will get it posted online on that website probably by next week. And then, so that's also where you can sign up for future webinars. And then I have in there too the Agri-Service BC at gov.bc.ca to send all your questions in. And if we didn't get any of your questions to Chris, if I've missed any of them, please just send them to that Agri-Service email and we'll pass them on to him. And one more thing I just wanted to mention is that the ministry does have a COVID response page, a website, and I have included the link there because you can find lots of updates on that page. And Chris, if there's nothing else, if there's nothing else, any last thoughts you want to say, I'll give you the opportunity to do that now.
I think I just wanted to like reinforce that farms are in a really good position in this, in that like you have a product that people are looking for. And I also wanted to say that the ministry staff have been so extremely responsive. Like everyone is working flat out to figure out how to make sure the sector has what it needs to be able to continue operating through the season. So anything that does come up, like questions or comments or so on, do send them on to the Agri-Service BC at gov.bc.ca. What I've found in communicating with staff is that they're really looking for feedback from people on the ground as far as what your needs are, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. And so that really does go into informing like what sort of resources do they put together to help. And like even the one today, one of the handouts that's there that I didn't reference, but it's an FAQ around good agricultural practices. It includes questions around how to manage your CSA, like what do you need to think about in terms of sanitizing CSA, making things available, and such. So just make sure that you put your questions forward, because you really, it's a challenging time, but there is a lot of support out there.
Yeah. And Chris, we want to thank you so much for taking the time today to deliver this webinar. We really appreciate it. And we know that there's lots of people and things pulling you in different directions. And we just really appreciate you taking the time away from your farm this morning as well, just to help give us some really great information. I just wanted to also put a plug in for our next week's webinar, which will be next Wednesday, and that is on rethinking good agricultural practices in the time of COVID, and that's with Elsie. So yeah, and I think with that, thank you again so much, and everyone, please stay safe and keep washing your hands, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone.